Hi everyone, it's Katie, and today I have a tarot deck review for you. Since I busted my 8-deck challenge earlier this month, I decided to kind of shift the way in which I was approaching my tarot study. And what I've decided to do, at least for now, is to really work quite extensively with one tarot deck each week. And the deck that I worked with last week was the Mystic Faerie Tarot. This is a Llewellyn deck by Ravenscroft and Barbara Moore. And I just had so much fun. This is a wonderfully playful deck, and I just wanted to share with you some of my thoughts and hopefully give you a bit of a taste of this beautiful deck. You can purchase this deck separately from the book, so you just get like a little tuck box and the deck with a little white book. However, I was lucky enough to score the box set that comes with the big chunky book by Barbara Moore. However, that does mean it comes in this really kind of waste of space box. You open it up and the book sits on top, and there's this white box that holds the cards, but it's much too big for the cards, so they kind of jumble around anyway. The book is fabulous. It's by Barbara Moore, so if you've experienced any of her work before, you know that she's very knowledgeable about tarot and has a very clear but also engaging writing style when it comes to tarot. This book is chunky. It's almost 300 pages long. I mean, obviously there's lots of pictures throughout, so it's not a full 300 pages, but for a tarot guidebook or companion book, it's really quite lengthy and really quite comprehensive. I read it from cover to cover and I loved it. The book starts off with a brief introduction to tarot, what is tarot and why we use tarot, and then for each of the major arcana it starts with a full page image, which is really useful, and then it's got 2 to 3 pages of text, and this kind of talks about the story of the card and then provides at the end is the short meaning for divinatory purposes. The minor arcana are a little bit special in this deck. Each of the suits from Ace to 10 tell a story. So the wands tell their own progressive story, as do the cups, etc. And so for that reason I really found reading this guidebook really useful, because just flicking through the cards I noticed that a lot of the same fairies were coming up in the same suit in the cards. So it became apparent to me that there was some kind of connection or story between these cards, and reading the guidebook through the suits, the stories, was really quite beautiful. They're not convoluted or complicated, but they do give meaning to the cards in quite a gentle and beautiful way. They do follow the very basic meanings of the traditional Rider-Waite, but obviously as they're kind of woven into a story, I guess their nuances change slightly, but they definitely do have the traditional underlining message. As for how they're shown in the book, just to give you an idea of what you get, again you get a full black and white image, and then you get 1 to 2 pages of information. So you get kind of the story of the card and then the message again. So you're getting the narrative behind the imagery, and then you're getting a bit of a message that's more conducive to divination. The court cards are described as either people that you come across or descriptions of your own personality. And again, you get the black and white image and about a page of information. There's also about 10 pages towards the end of the book that are dedicated entirely to using this deck specifically. And that chapter is called Visiting the Fairy Garden, and she goes through creating sacred space, asking questions, selecting a spread, etc. And then, as with all Barbara Moore books, she has several spreads for you to select from, and they're all quite interesting and specific to the deck, which is always beautiful to see. The next chapter provides some sample readings to give you an idea of what sort of questions are appropriate and also how we can go about interpreting the cards. And then at the end she has a quick reference guide, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's the name of the cards followed by a couple of keywords, just to kind of get you going if you need a bit of a reflection. I wanted to read you this little part in the introduction that Barbara Moore is talking about this deck specifically and Linda's artwork. I think it really sums up a lot of how I felt about the artwork, and I think it was a really beautiful introduction to the deck. Linda's art creates a luminous portal that more fully draws you into a realm of otherworldliness, so that you can let go and be open to all possibilities. It more than invites, it compels. If her only achievement was stylistic, that would be quite enough to set the Mystic Faerie apart from other tarot decks. However, she brings deeper substance as well. While creating this deck, Linda said, I believe that we all have a little bit of fairy magic within our hearts, helping us to make the right decisions in our lives. I hope that my paintings help people to stop and think a little, yet still find some comfort and hope within their everyday lives. I have always associated the Fae hand in hand with nature, guardians of the world. The images I am trying to portray are those of a wise, caring, proud race of people, all of whom have blood ties to nature in one way or another. And I do really feel like she achieved that. They aren't quite as pretty and delicate as like that more Victorian fairy imagery, but they are how I see fairies a lot of the time. But they are small and cute and playful, but they have this proud, wise sense about them. And now to the deck, the good part of the review. I will start by saying that I have inked the sides of my deck gold to match the deck. I think it looks fabulous. I used Dewdrop Brilliance, the Galaxy Gold, which Kelly from A Truth and Story suggested. The backing looks like this, and it is reversible, so you'll notice that the border on both the backing and the fronts of the cards is kind of like that shiny gold. If you have the Shadowscapes deck, you'll know that the silver border has that kind of sheen to it. This is the same for this deck, except gold, obviously. Being a Llewellyn deck, it's Llewellyn cardstock. The size of the card is very traditional, what you expect. All of that stuff is just plain and simple what you're used to seeing with Llewellyn. The cards themselves, this is the full, have quite a lot of detail going on, but not too much, so they feel busy, not for me anyway. They have quite an ornate border, which I know might bother some people, but for me it really works because she talks a lot in the guidebook, Barbara does that is, about stepping into the garden. And so it really does kind of feel like that's what you're doing, is stepping through a portal or through some gateway. The mages are all pretty traditional. Here we have the Magician. There are a couple of changes. For example, this is the Priestess rather than the High Priestess. The Hierophant becomes the Priest. But the meanings for those that have been changed are still very, very similar. The other one that's been changed, which is hardly at all and you'd quite expect it almost, rather than the Hanged Man, we have the Hanged Fae. Although this deck is quite traditional in a lot of its meanings, I found the best and most effective and most enjoyable way to read it was very intuitive. I think some decks kind of lend themselves to more intuitive reading than others, and it was interesting that I thought this was going to be a very traditional meaning-based sort of deck, but it was just speaking to me so clearly. It was, you know, having a conversation with me. It was really engaging me in that sort of way, that although I would come back to the meanings once I was reflecting on the messages the deck had given me a little bit more, for example afterwards, and I was journaling, I would kind of bring in the more traditional meanings that way. As I was laying out the cards, it was very much just whatever popped up to me, and it was this talkative, conversational sort of experience between myself and the deck, and that was both beautiful and just really, really fun. Another cool little thing about this deck is the 2 extra cards that very often come with decks that usually are either made into title cards or artist cards or advertising cards are turned into Fairy Greeting and Fairy Farewell, and they have a little poem or invocation on each. One to kind of invite the fairies in to work with you, and one to thank them and release them. So I'll read the Fairy Greeting to you. Fairies clever, fairies bright, from garden, wood and pond, guide my thoughts, guide my sight, please help me find the answers on a path that's true and right. I love this. I wish more decks did this. This is one of my favorite things about this deck. It's such a simple idea, but it really works, and it really helps you develop a more emotive and personal connection with the deck when you're kind of like invoking the energies that surround the deck itself and also the entities that are associated with the deck. So I'm going to take you down to my altar so that we can kind of take a look at the suits, so each individual suit as a whole, because as I said, they really tell a story. So I think it's useful when I'm trying to explain that to you, for you to be able to see the cards laid out. That might be a little bit easier than me trying to hold them up. So this is the suit of wands that you have laid out before you. It starts with Ace in the top left hand corner, goes to 5 of wands, and then 6 on the bottom left hand corner to the 10 of wands. So I thought I would read you parts of the story that goes along with this suit, and then just explain to you briefly and fill in the other parts of the story, so you can kind of get an idea of the narrative that goes along, but also an example of what the guidebook has to say. So the ace starts off, as all good fairy tales do, is with once upon a time. Once upon a time, on a warm summer evening, a fairy clan gathered to hear stories told by their elders. The stories were about faraway places and strange sights. After the elders went to sleep, some of the younger fae decided they wanted to travel and seek new things, so they'd have their own stories to tell. The idea of going off and having adventures delighted them, and they danced with glee to celebrate their decision. To bring luck to their enterprise, they crafted a wand, representing their strength and resolve, from an oak branch. They topped it off with a red crystal that appeared to hold a fiery energy within its core, which, they said, showed their focus, determination, and passion. Finally, they wound 2 griffin feathers around the crystal to bring wisdom and fortune to their endeavour. After it was finished, they put it in the middle of the fairy ring that their dancing had created. When they returned, they would sit in this very spot, surrounded by their clan, and tell grand stories of their adventures. And so it was. Years later, the fairies came to call this spot the Place of Beginnings. Whenever any fae wanted to start a new venture, they'd sit in this place of beginnings and make their plans. So the Two of Wands is where our story really begins. So I will read you the narrative for this card, and then I'll go on and just kind of explain the rest of the narrative. One day, years and years after the Place of Beginnings was created, 2 young fairies decided they wanted to go and seek their fortune together. Sitting near the wand, they were inspired and formed a partnership, shaking hands and agreeing to stick together through thick and thin. They were very enthusiastic, filled with dreams and desires. They talked of possibilities, and although they weren't sure what they wanted, they were certain that they'd find nothing but good fortune and fabulous adventures. So basically, the wand suit tells the story of these 2 young fae going off on their adventure. So in the 3 of Wands, we see them starting to develop their plan. They know that they can't go off on their adventure until they know what it is they're looking for and where they want to go. So in the 3 of Wands, they decide that they want to go after the Phoenix and see if they can find the Phoenix, who they believe will give them a feather, which will make them rich. In the 4 of Wands, the 2 young fae that we've come to know meet a young fire sprite who gives them an egg. She's not sure what it contains, but she likes the 2 boys, so she gives them this egg that she believes will bring them luck. In the 5 of Wands, we see them having a bit of an argument. They're not sure what the egg contains. One believes it's a phoenix, and so therefore they should stay and tend to it until it hatches. The other believes it's a dragon, and that they should leave it because he knows dragons are dangerous. And they can't arrive on an agreement, they can't arrive at a compromise, and they're really struggling to decide what to do next. In the 6 of Wands, the egg has hatched and it's a dragon, and one of the fae is really quite excited about this turn of events and thinks it's fabulous, and the other fae recognises that dragons are dangerous and scary and need to be handled with some caution. In the 7 of Wands, we see that the dragon is growing a lot quicker than either of them had anticipated. One of the fae is really quite done with the whole situation. He believes that the dragon can't be tamed and that they just need to leave it. The other fae has grown quite attached to some extent. He feels responsibility. He doesn't feel like they can leave the baby dragon even though he is afraid. So basically they're just struggling to find any common ground now. In the 8 of Wands, we're told that the fae that wasn't too keen on this whole situation actually threatens to destroy the dragon, thinking that it's the only option available to him. The other fae doesn't want to see that happen, and so jumps on the back of the dragon and flies off. So in a rushed, heated moment, a decision made in the heat of the moment, he severs his friendship and commits to taking care of this dragon. In the 9 of Wands, we see the fae alone with the dragon. He's living on the outskirts of a village, but he's quite stressed because although he tries to tie the dragon down and keep it under control, while he's asleep at night he knows that it escapes and it comes back with blood all over its mouth, and he's concerned that fae and sprite lives are at risk. And in this card we see him considering what his options are and trying to decide what he can do next. To finish the story off, I think I'll read you what the book says about this Ten of Wands, which shows a pretty intense image of the Fae and the dragon. The fairy and his dragon live far from any other Fae folk, but still, a dragon can fly very far, very easily. The fairy spends his time keeping the dragon bound and caring for it as best he can. He believes that it is his burden to carry, that he must take care of the dragon while keeping it away from villagers. It is a heavy burden, and it doesn't make him or the dragon happy. It is a sad story, but one has to wonder, why doesn't the fairy let the dragon fly away to join other dragons who live far away from fairies, pixies, sprites, and elves? And the message is, you are carrying a very heavy burden. Responsibilities overwhelm you. Your life feels pretty miserable. There will be times in your life when this is true. In those cases, you must find hope and strength where you can, such as turning to other people for help or inspiration. However, you should make sure that you aren't carrying a burden needlessly. When you are feeling overwhelmed, examine your load. Do you really need to be responsible for it all? Is there perhaps a better way to handle the load? Is there some way to make your path easier? So that is the rather sad tale of the fairy and his dragon. But as you can see, it does provide a really interesting narrative to help you interpret the cards. I think it's really useful, and although the meanings are kind of added to with different layers, there is certainly the traditional meanings embedded in those messages. So I thought I'd give you guys a bit of a look at the major arcana closer up. I'm shaking a little bit today, so I thought being down here at the altar would be a bit easier. And these cards are really quite pretty. In the guidebook, she mentions that not only does he have the pentacle and the sword, etc., in front of him, those are also represented by the suits of the cards that he's throwing about. The priestess, or the high priestess. The empress. And again, these are all quite traditional as well. I mean, obviously adjusted to fit much more closely the fairy theme. For example, here the guidebook actually makes mention of the fact that the emperor is wearing shoes, that he has the responsibility, much more than his other fae folk, to kind of be a gatekeeper between the human world and the fae world, that he has responsibilities that reflect much more closely the structures and the responsibilities that we as people have. And he has to take on a lot of those responsibilities, and that is symbolized by the shoes, which most fae don't wear. There are plenty of mythological creatures in these cards, rather than you know, our standard run-of-the-mill animals that we see. The Wheel of Fortune's really quite pretty. And Justice in this deck is blindfolded. Sorry about my shaking. The Hanged Man is renamed the Hanged Fae. Death is quite beautiful as well, with the skull. And Temperance. The Devil looks quite playful in his own way. And the Tower. The Star is a card that popped up for me quite a lot while I was using this deck. And she was always a welcomed feature in my readings. The Moon is quite ethereal and beautiful too. The wolf there. And the Sun. I love how both the Moon and the Sun, their hair kind of turns into the Moon or the Sun. Judgment. And this Fae has quite angel-esque wings, as well as the trumpet. And the World. So that's a bit of a look at the Mystic Faerie Tarot by Barbara Moore and Linda Ravenscroft. I love this deck. I think it's a beautiful, charming, sweet, playful, cheeky deck. And one that I wasn't expecting to love quite as much as I do. I think it's really beautiful, but it's not the beauty that draws me into this deck, it's its character. It really has a lot of character and personality, and that makes it enjoyable to work with and to get to know. You feel like you're really developing a relationship with this deck. At least I did. I mean, we talk about that all the time, that, you know, it's about developing a relationship and a working relationship with the deck. And I think, you know, if you have a few decks, you'll know that there are some that have a very playful, friendly sort of relationship that they develop with you. Others have a much more structured relationship, or kind of teacher relationship. There's all sorts of relationships that we can experience, both between people and between decks. For me, this was really that more fun, enjoyable, casual almost, but still insightful relationship. And that made working with this deck just a joy this past week. So if you have any questions about this deck or about anything that I've mentioned in this video, please feel free to leave those questions below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And until next time, guys, so much love. Bye.